Today on CodeDependent, I will be talking about animating the state of a button object to indicate what's going on. In this case, I wanted the button to be a very graphical object, a sort of a 3D sphere object, and to give more of a representation of actually pushing that object in. So in a previous episode, we took a look at standard buttons and ways of animating the skin properties so that we could indicate when the button was moving to an overstate, so it was hovering over the button, and whether or not we should actually animate the click state. And in general, I think an automatic immediate click is probably a good thing. In this case, I actually wanted the feeling of pushing the button in. And in addition to that, I wanted to define a 3D button look to sort of give it a more distinctive look. So I've defined this ellipse here with a radial gradient. And see, we've got kind of a specular highlight look to it here. And you define that, we can take a look at the code, with gradient entries. So we have a radial gradient on the object. We have a focal point ratio of 0.5, which means I'm going to actually have the center of the radial gradient positioned halfway in between the edge and the center of the object that it's operating on. And we have a rotation angle of -45, so that actually positions it sort of around here, up in the upper right part of the circle. And we've defined the focal point ratio to be different in state 2. So when I click on the button, I actually just want a dimple right in the middle. And so I thought, okay, well, we'll just have a radial gradient centered around the center there. And it's not quite yet, but you sort of see what I'm going for with the circle, where we have a radial gradient that has a dimple look in the middle, so it's kind of a shadow in the middle, and then there's more of the specular highlight around the edges. A little bit more work to do, but you sort of get what I'm going for. And I thought, well, why don't we animate that look? So as I push in, I want the button to actually give it a pushing look instead of simply a push look. So I started that and wrote an animation that changed the radial gradient entries over time to change the colors. And so here's that animation. So we have a parallel defined. It's only running one child effect right now, but we'll get to the others later. And we say, okay, we're going to run an animate color on both the center and the middle entries of this radial gradient. So the center is going to change from this color, the default color, to this color over here. And the middle is going to change from this color to this color here. So we run an animate color effect. It automatically picks up the before and after state properties and automatically inserts the appropriate color interpolator so that it can actually do color correct interpolation over time, and then runs an animation that changes the radial gradient entries for this thing that defines a specular highlight here to the radial gradient that defines this sort of dimple look here. So that's okay, but notice how it sort of pops to the middle. Well, what we've done is changed our focal point ratio to be at this 0.5 area, sort of halfway between the middle and the edge, to 0. So we actually want the focal point ratio to be 0, just emanating from the center of the object in the second state. And so when we run this, since we're not running an animation on that thing, it just pops there, right? So that's not the look that I was going for. So we can add another animation here to our parallel and say, okay, at the same time as you're animating the color properties, the gradient entry colors themselves, you can actually animate the focal point ratio as well. So in this case, we're going to be moving the focal point ratio at the same time as we're animating the colors. So we're actually moving it from this area up here down to the middle, and at the same time we're actually animating the colors and the gradient entries. Right? So that's a little bit better. It's still not quite what I was looking for, but it does avoid that sort of popping animation effect or artifact that we had before. The way that we define the animation, you can see here, we have an animate that's declared on the gradient itself. So the radial gradient has this focal point ratio that it has by default, and then it has a focal point ratio in state 2, and it changes from 0.5 to 0. And we have an animate effect declared on it with a single simple motion path that's going to be animating the focal point ratio, and it automatically picks up the before and the after properties and runs the animation on it. So that was okay, but still not quite as smooth and natural as I was going for. So I thought, well, what if we just run a simple crossfade effect on it instead? So we can run that one here, and that actually looks better to me, right? So crossfade simply takes a bitmap snapshot of an object before and after, and then using Pixel Blender under the hood, animates a fade from one to the other. So it basically modulates the value. It combines the two images over time, and it does that by combining an increasing amount of the after image and a decreasing amount of the before image, so that we're basically fading from one image to the other over time. So in this case, it actually gives a fairly smooth effect, and kind of what I was looking for here. Again, I think the actual dimple effect on the after could use a little bit of help. But the animation on that dimple effect, changing from the before to the after, I think is much smoother than what I was trying to do before. And fairly easy to use this thing. This is using, pixel bender under the hood, all kinds of complicated and interesting stuff going on that you could customize and get some really great effects out of. But in this case, all we're doing is a simple crossfade, and we simply say, run this crossfade on the sphere. And the crossfade will automatically take a snapshot of this ellipse object in the before state, take a bitmap snapshot after, and just use pixel bender to animate that thing over time automatically for us. If you want to see the code for this application and other related applications, check out my blog at graphics-geek.blogspot.com.